Hello everyone and welcome to my April wrap-up. My name is Laurel Ann and I realize that we're like 60% of the way through May already, but if you care about that, you're dead to me. I have 9 books to chat with you about today, 8 of which were related to the O.W.L.s Magical Readathon, which I did vlog, so I will link those down below if you want to watch them. I think that they're actually pretty good, those vlogs, although there is still one that I have not edited or posted because I got to the end of vlogging and I was like, good, I'm done with vlogging. I don't know if I'm going to bother, like I don't know if anyone cares. We'll see. Anyway, the first book I read in April was Ask Again Yes by Beth Keane. This is a family drama, maybe even a family saga that follows 2 families. We open in, I think, the 1970s when Francis Gleason has just arrived in New York from Ireland. He joins the NYPD and is put on a beat with a fellow rookie named Brian Stanhope, who has just married another Irish immigrant named Anne. After a few years, Francis and his wife move to a small town outside of New York City, and shortly after that, Brian and Anne move into the house next door to them. We watch as these families become inextricably interwoven through love and tragedy, and we follow them all the way up until now, essentially the 2010s. This book deals with the immigrant experience, forgiveness, and loss, and probably most interestingly to me, how perceptions and treatment of mental illness have changed over the last 5 decades. I really enjoyed this story. It was gripping and I think it was very well crafted. The main characters are really strong and well defined, although I did think it was a little weird that it's only the main characters, like the side characters, even the ones that are in the family, aren't all totally fleshed out. For example, the Gleasons have, I think, 3 daughters, and only one of them is like the star, and the other 2, like, I couldn't tell you anything about them. So I just thought that was a little weird. I also feel like maybe it was just a little bit too neat. I don't know exactly what it was, but it's like, even though there was a lot of meat in this book, I was just left wanting a little more to chew on. And I'm not exactly sure why I felt that way, but I did. Still, definitely excellent, and I think if you like Little Fires Everywhere, you will definitely like this one. The next book that I read was Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. This is a fictionalized retelling, I guess, of Jeanette Winterson's childhood, growing up as the adopted daughter of a devout Pentecostal Christian woman. Pentecostals are the ones that like speak in tongues and they take the Bible literally, so it's like pretty intense stuff. From a very young age, Jeanette is expected to grow up to become a missionary for the church, and when the book opens, she is totally on board with that. She's a really enthusiastic believer and she loves the church and she loves preaching and she's very good at it, even though she's only like a little kid. But as she enters adolescence, she starts having relationships with other girls and her sexuality is consistently denounced and rejected by the church, and slowly but surely that kind of chips away at her and she falls away from her family and the church. This book uses stream of consciousness and magical realism and absurdist humor, and it's truly unlike anything I've ever read. It exposes a lot of the hypocrisy in organized religion, but it also is remarkably unjudgmental. You can tell that even as an adult looking back, Jeanette Winterson herself still has a lot of compassion for the people who raised her. This is also refreshing in that it's not a story of somebody questioning or rejecting their own sexuality, because throughout the whole book, Jeanette is just unwaveringly herself. It's really interesting to see how when she's still a part of the church and she still has a lot of love for the church, she sort of negotiates some kind of balance between these 2 totally opposing forces in her life. I'm really, really happy that I've finally read this book, but I will say that I think it's the kind of book that I would have to read again or at least like discuss with somebody else who's maybe smarter than me in order to really get a handle on it. Next, I finished Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. This is a YA dystopian where girls, for whatever reason, are no longer born naturally, so they're created in a lab and then raised in this school. And in the year after the girls turn 16, all of the 16-year-old boys in their district or zone start coming to the school once every few weeks to kind of date the girls, and at the end of this period, each of the boys will choose a wife, or companion is what they call it. All the girls who aren't chosen as companions become either concubines, which are basically unpaid sex workers, or they stay at the school to raise and educate the future generations of girls. The way I described this before was that it's like The Handmaid's Tale meets Mean Girls. She also leans pretty heavily on a lot of the other great dystopians out there. And I think that this is a really clever adaptation of the genre into the YA category. I was really impressed by how poignant it actually is. I think kind of what killed the YA dystopia is that so many of them were just sort of adventure stories. And this one I think is a lot more similar to The Hunger Games in that I think it really intends to lead younger readers to really observe and question the world in which they find themselves. Now, this is not an easy read. At times, it kind of feels like just reading every negative thought you've ever had about yourself or your body, and I think it could be really triggering to anybody who has or recovering from any sort of eating disorder, so really just wanted to put that out there. Now, I really like Louise O'Neill already, and even though I didn't think I was especially interested in this book, I ended up really appreciating it, and I'm glad that I read it. Next, I reread Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. This is my original copy that I bought for $5.99 at my school book fair in the year 1999. So, fun fact. Anyway, this was my first time listening to the audiobooks. I listened to the Stephen Fry one, and it was a good time. Loved it. I'm gonna keep rereading the series. It made me happy. Moving on. Next book was also a reread, and that was Night Flying by Rita Murphy. Again, this is a childhood favorite. It's about a family of women who can all fly. This tiny novella follows our protagonist Georgia in the days before her 16th birthday as she prepares for her first solo flight, which is like a rite of passage kind of ceremonial thing in her family. Georgia is wrestling with a lot of uncertainty. She's not really sure that she feels like she belongs. And that anxiety is really amplified when her aunt Carmen, who's been banished for the last 16 years, shows up unexpectedly. This is a really sweet coming of age story, and I understand why it spoke to me so much when I was younger. Next, I read The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein. This is what I would call a narrative biography about a woman named Sandra Pankhurst, who started and runs her own very successful trauma cleaning business. So she and her employees clean up the scenes of violent deaths and other just like intense cleanup jobs, like situations where there's been significant decomposition of a corpse, or like meth lab explosions and hoarder houses. The book jumps back and forth between the present day as Sarah Krasnostein observes jobs that Sandra is taking on, and scenes from her past life as she grew up in an abusive household, transitioned in her 20s, supported herself through sex work, and then getting married and starting the business. I just thought this book was tremendous. It's one of those really serendipitous nonfiction books where something like really momentous happens in the subject's life as the person is researching and writing it. The ending is absolutely gorgeous, and Krasnostein just really brings the whole thing together in a really clever and beautiful way. I would recommend this to a lot of people, but particularly to fans of Three Women by Lisa Taddeo. I think the writing is kind of similar in vibe, and it also kind of uses a similar technique in using these like small specific stories to sort of gently shine a light on larger truths. Next, I read Spring by Ellie Smith. This is the penultimate installment in her seasonal quartet. This follows a middle-aged filmmaker who is reeling from the recent death of his colleague and best friend, as well as a young woman who works as a security guard in a migrant detention center, and then the third character is this sort of mysterious, kind of impish little girl who brings them together. The books in the seasonal quartet aren't really related at all in terms of plot, so you can read them in any order. But what they have in common is that they all use these small, quiet stories of people just kind of talking to each other in order to explore issues that are sort of dominating the global conversation in the year in which Ali Smith writes and publishes them. This one deals with detention of immigrants, state surveillance, and historical revisionism, as well as loads and loads of other stuff. Way too much to list here, but that's just a little preview. My enjoyment of this whole series has really just been on an upward trend. This one, quite frankly, blew my mind. I'm so excited now for summer, which is coming out so soon. I also recently found out that there's an 8-week turnaround on these books, which is unheard of. So she gave the manuscript to the publisher on May 4th and it's being published on July 2nd. So how? She's just on a whole other plane of existence from the rest of us. I'm just so excited to see what Ali Smith has to say about 2019 and 2020. And the final book I have to talk with you about today is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This essentially is a story of two star-crossed lovers set in a magical circus. This book and we had a journey together. I went in with fairly high expectations. I know that this is a book that a lot of people have read and a lot of people have loved. And I just heard over and over again that the writing was just extremely beautiful. And I love beautiful writing. So I was like, cool, this is gonna be a fun, beautiful book to read. And I just didn't get that. I just don't think that the language in here is particularly noteworthy. I almost DNF'd it, but I decided to give it another chance, and somewhere along the line I just realized that this is just a romance with some magical elements and it wasn't gonna get deeper than that, and that's fine. And so after that my experience really turned around until I eventually got super hooked on it. But then with about 25% left, my level of enjoyment just sort of but I did finish it. So here's what this book does really well. It describes beautiful rooms effectively. It's very escapist in that way. You can really imagine yourself in these beautiful settings. But the characters are just paper thin. I honestly felt like they existed purely as vehicles to take the reader from one beautiful room into the next. And then I thought that the end was stupid. Now clearly this is a book that speaks to a lot of people and it's just not for me, but yeah, I'm just kind of left a bit baffled by this one, to be honest. I will say The Starless Sea sounds a little bit more interesting to me, so I'm not totally ruling out reading that one, but I'm probably gonna wait a few years and just see. Did I say that The Night Circus was my last book? It's not. I also read The Foundling by Stacey. This is historical fiction set in Georgian London, and it's about a working class woman named Beth who gives up her infant daughter because she just doesn't have the money to care for her. And then after 6 years of working and saving, Beth returns to the hospital in order to retrieve her daughter, only to be told that only a day after she dropped her off, someone claiming to be her already came and got her. I liked this a lot. The story had a lot of twists and turns, and I was never really able to predict where it was gonna go. It also seems to be extremely well researched. I did a little bit of reading on my own after I finished this about the real Foundling hospital that this was based on, and there are historical drawings and stuff of the interiors of this place, and it was really cool because Stacey Foundling described them so well that I pictured them exactly the way they looked in those drawings. There are also just a lot of other really neat and kind of quirky little historical details. There's also racial diversity, which I loved because For so many years, we've just been pretending that there were only white people in England before like 1960. I also thought that this pretty cleverly subverted the expectations of the roles of women and the ways in which women will interact with each other and react to intense situations. I will say the ending was maybe just a little bit too tidy for me, but I'm a cynic and a curmudgeon, so it's probably just me. Okay, so that is my April wrap up. Let me know below in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you think of them, or if you want to read any of these books. I'm always interested to have a chat in the comments. I hope you're all staying safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye! I'm gonna actually remember to do a thumbnail. It exposes a lot of the hypocrisy. Okay, one of those should be good, and I really hope that I don't have lipstick on my teeth.